All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the EASSI Solar 101 webinar. This webinar is brought to you by the EASSI program. It's the Energy Assistance Solar Savings Initiative program with the City of South Bend. We've also extended this webinar to folks that are also outside of the program or might be interested in the program, or who represent a nonprofit or commercial entity and are thinking about solar. This webinar should be helpful and informative for you if you're thinking about solar. So let's get started. So this is our agenda for today. We'll start off with some quick introductions. Then I'll hand it off to Dan, who represents Solar United Neighbors, and he'll talk about solar basics. And then we'll wrap up the webinar with connecting solar and EASSI and how those two relate in terms of what that looks like for EASSI participants within the program. And then we'll conclude the webinar with some Q&A and then next steps for folks that are part of the EASSI program. So this is the EASSI roadmap, just to provide a little bit of background and lay of the land in terms of what EASSI steps look like for folks that are part of the program. So right now we're in between week of April 10th and week of May 1st. So most of the folks that are part of the EASSI program this year have received their energy assessment report, and that assessment report has identified energy savings opportunities. Some of those might be solar, and between now and May 1st provides that opportunity to review that report. We also hope that these webinars, this webinar, in addition to the webinar we had last Tuesday, which was on energy efficiency, rebates and incentives, and then a webinar we'll have next week, will help provide more context in terms of potential projects you want to pursue. So week of May 1st is when we'll be reviewing that assessment report with you and hearing from you any questions you might have and projects you're thinking about pursuing. So just wanted to provide that timeline for you, and this is just a little bit more specifics in terms of the post-assessment process, where once you receive that assessment report, you will want to chat with your board members, your internal stakeholders, to share that report with your organization, and then you'll want to collect quotes based on the projects you want to pursue, and then the following steps are the reimbursement and post-project process. So just kind of giving you a little bit of a high-level overview of what EASSI looks like once we've met with you to review the assessment report. So now I'm going to hand it off to Dan from Solar United Neighbors. And Dan, if you can give a quick introduction and then just let me know when you would like me to advance the slides.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Glad to be with you here this morning. Excited about the EASSI process and the great work that you all are doing with a team at the Sustainability Office in South Bend. I am the Indiana Program Associate for Solar United Neighbors, and we'll go to the next slide, Alex. So I'll tell you a little bit about sun in just a moment, but just want to share with you some basics about solar energy that will hopefully apply well to the work that you're doing. Next slide, please. What we're going to cover is, in the presentation in general, solar technology, solar economics, and then what the EASSI program looks like. And I'll do the first two of those sections. Next slide, please. So Solar United Neighbors, we're a national nonprofit that helps people go solar, and we advocate for better rooftop solar policy. You can see the statistics there. We've done a lot of work nationally, but also here in Indiana, where we've had helped over 250 households, businesses, and organizations go solar with the impact that we think has moved the ball along a little bit here in Indiana. Glad to be working with the EASSI program. Next slide, please. So let's talk about a little bit about solar technology. You know, a question I get a lot is, does solar really work in Indiana? And it works great. You can see from the map, there's a lot of solar sources in the southwest part of the U.S. in that orange and red, but we're in that yellow greenish area of the country, and we have a lot more solar that we can take advantage of than Germany does. And Germany is one of the leading solar countries in the world. So we have all that sun to grow corn. We can grow a little bit of electricity as well, too. Next slide, please. And solar's been growing. 2011, the IURC expanded net metering, which was a compensation program for people when they send electricity out to the grid. We'll explain that a little bit more in a bit about how a solar system works, but that spurred the growth of solar in Indiana. But in 2017, the state passed a law getting rid of net metering. And that crediting program in the large investor-owned utilities in Indiana. And so they set a deadline of 2022, July 1 of 2022, to have your system installed to be grandfathered into that net metering program. And so we saw solar explode across the state in that interim 5 years, and it's still continuing to grow. This program is a great example of that. Next slide, please. So how does a solar panel work? Sun hits the panel, and that panel converts the energy of the sun into electricity. There's lots of different kinds of solar systems out there, a lot of different types, but like thermal solar, where it's just heating water or heating a substance. But in this case, we're talking about a chemical reaction that turns that solar energy into electricity, or PV, solar photovoltaic system. Next slide, please. So how does this work? You have your solar array, a set of modules on the roof of your building. The sunlight hits those modules. The sunlight knocks loose a bunch of electrons, which becomes electricity, and those modules send that electricity to your inverter. Now, the modules produce DC, or direct current electricity. The inverter changes that into AC, or alternating current electricity, the kind of electricity your business is going to use. And then that inverter sends the electricity to the panel. And then the panel, in turn, just sends it to the loads in your house, whether it's lights, computers, refrigeration, whatever it might be in your building. That's it. The panel sends that electricity to those different loads. If at that moment you're producing more electricity than you can use, then the electricity will go through the utility meter and out to the grid, where it's used by your neighbors. The way electricity works is it's going to go to the first pathway it has. So if you send it out to the grid, then the business or the organization or the home next to you are going to be the first ones to use that electricity, if they're assuming they're using electricity at the moment. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean when we're talking electricity. Kilowatts. Kilowatts is the instantaneous power that is produced by a system, and a system is going to be measured in kilowatts. 1 kilowatt, 10 kilowatts, 30 kilowatts, whatever it might be. That's the size of the system. Kilowatt hours is the energy produced over a certain amount of time, and that's what you're going to see on your electric bill, is the kilowatt hours, the amount of energy or work that you can do with that energy over a certain amount of time. So the way I like to think about it is, when you buy a car, the engine has a certain amount of horsepower. It has that horsepower size, whether it's sitting or whether it's going. It's the potential power that car can produce, measured in horsepower. Miles per hour, however, is the amount of work that's being done, how fast that car is going at that given moment over a period of time. And that's the difference between kilowatts and kilowatt hours. Kilowatts is the potential energy, kilowatt hours is what's actually happening when you're using electricity. So an average small commercial size, which would be similar to a nonprofit organization, is about 25 to 50 kilowatts. And if you look at that building, the picture of the building there, you can see, give you some sense of the size of a system as a 34.4 kilowatts array on a building. Next slide, please. So let's talk panel or modules. It's basically a sandwich. It's think of it as a solar sandwich. The solar cells are the heart of that sandwich, and they're the things that produce the electricity. Those cells are stitched together into that layer on that module. Then there's going to be some encapsulant to protect it and hold it together. Glass over the front of it that's really strong glass, and similar to what you might see, like say on the windshield of a car, and that's held together by a frame. And then there's a back sheet on the back where they connected junction box. Then that's the connection to the electrical system. The electricity flows out through that junction box. And when you stitch a number of those modules together, you get a solar array. Next panel, please, or next slide, please. The next part of the component of the system is the racking. The racking is the system that attaches the modules to the roof of your building. And you can see some workers there putting the modules on a steel roof. Next slide, please. There's lots of different ways to put the panels on the roof. Whatever type of roof you have, there's going to be a system for that. On the upper left, you see flashing going under a shingle for a composite roof. Those are attached and they're sealed, and they hold up really well on a roof and generally do not leak. You shouldn't have to worry about that. On the right, upper right, is a standing seam that similar to that roof I just showed you, where there's a clamp that goes on those seams, and then the panels are held on by those clamps. And there's no hole put in the roof or anything. It works really well if you've got a metal roof. In the bottom right is a stone ballast system. That's what's used a lot on flat commercial roofs. Basically, the panels are put on metal racks and slightly tilted to maximize their energy production. And then they're held down basically by stones, just those stone blocks sitting on the panels. And that works really well, or sitting on the racks of the panels. And that works really well as well. But whatever your roof system is, there's a solution for that. Next slide, please. Now, you may have the opportunity to do a ground-mounted system if you've got some property, some land, or good-sized yard next to your building. Not common in urban areas, but it is possible. And two advantages to this: one is you can maximize your production because you can adjust those panels to face in the direction that's the most optimal for your situation. And the second advantage is if you can make a statement, say, "Hey, we got panels. Look, they're right here." So that's an option. And I know that for commercial buildings, and I suspect the same is true for the nonprofits, that the zoning folks will work with you on that if need be. Next slide, please. So what's a good roof for solar? Well, first off, orientation. South is the best in terms of overall production, but east and west at our latitudes work really well too. You can have a good solar production and make it economically viable by facing east or west. And sometimes, depending on your situation and that you're working with, some people might find it advantageous to put panels on the east and the west facing parts of your roof, so you can catch the morning sun and the afternoon sun and lengthen that time of day where you're producing electricity. But the design of the installer will talk to you about what would work best for your situation. Little or no shading obviously is important. You don't want a tree covering those panels the whole day. Momentarily might be fine, depending on the time of day. We talk about the solar window of 9 to 3. You want to be 9 to 3 shade free is kind of the saying there. So little or no shading, enough space to mount the panels. If you have 200 square feet of roof, then you probably have enough space for a minimal system to put on there. And it doesn't have to be one square or one rectangle. It can be patching around roof vents or things like that, or chimney or whatever it might be. But as long as it's at least 200 square feet total, you're good to go. Next slide, please. Some commercial roofer considerations you want to be aware of. One is your warranty, that make sure that the installation will not harm the warranty on the roof. And you're going to want to work with your roof installer about that to make sure, to confirm that that's the case. Structural integrity, the panels are not super heavy, but they are not light either. And you want to make sure that the building integrity will hold the panels, and you want to minimize the roof penetration. You can see there that a penetration was made into the roof with that racking system and that it was sealed. So if you have some penetration in the roof, it's not going to be necessarily a problem. You just want to minimize that and then make sure it's sealed properly. And for all three of these considerations, the solar installer that you're working with will help you with that. It's not you to try to figure out if the building integrity will hold. It's not up to you to minimize the roof penetrations. your installer will help you with all three of those. Next slide, please. So the next component we're going to talk about is inverters. I talked about inverters before, saying that they convert DC electricity that the panels produce into AC electricity that your building can use. There's a couple different kind of inverters. One is a string inverter and one is a microinverter. A string inverter is a single inverter that is going to take all the DC electricity that is produced by the array and convert that into AC. Microinverters are individual inverters for each of the modules or panels, and they go on the back of that. They convert the electricity there at the panel. Now, pluses and minuses of each. You can think of this as sort of like the old versus the new Christmas tree lights. In the old Christmas tree lights, if one light bulb went out, then the whole string didn't work. Well, it kind of works the same way with a string inverter. If one of the panels starts to produce less electricity, maybe there's a cloud going over and momentarily it's not producing as much because there's a shade. That's going to affect the other the electricity output of the other panels and reduce those. Whereas with a microinverter, because it's done at each of the individual modules, if a cloud happens to go by and that module isn't producing enough electricity as it normally does, that's not going to negatively affect the output of the other modules in that system. So you may be asking yourself, well, why would you want a string versus a microinverter? Well, a couple of reasons. One is, as you might imagine, with more microinverters versus one string inverter, it's more expensive. It's also, these systems are very reliable, but nothing's perfect. So if you might get a microinverter goes out, when you increase the number of parts, you increase the chances of something not working correctly. So to minimize the loss of power in a string inverter, they have DC optimizers now, which can mitigate a good portion of that. So what is best for you is a conversation you want to have with your installer. They will help you figure out what would best fit your budget as well as your situation. But that's the different kinds of inverters you can deal with. Next slide, please. The next component is your electrical panel. It's a fairly simple connection into the panel from the system. Most commercial electric systems aren't going to need an upgrade before solar. There's no guarantee that yours won't, but most commercial buildings will not need that. And again, your installer can help you figure that out. It's critical to know your location's electrical voltages. And again, your installer can help you with that. The transformer size, so the utility will have, I&M will have a transformer that your building connects to. And there'll be a number of different buildings that will connect to that one transformer. So a conversation you may end up having, you and your installer, with I&M is that can that transformer handle the addition of solar into the system? Most of the times they can, but every once in a while, there'll need to be a switch out for the transformer to have a bigger transformer to service your part of the city. Sometimes the utility will ask the customer to cover the cost of it, and sometimes they won't. So it sort of depends on your situation, but that's something to be aware of, that you're probably going to have that conversation with the utility. Next slide, please. So what happens when the power goes out? Well, when the power goes out, the grid goes out, your system is designed to shut down. And that's the second purpose of the inverter. The inverter will shut your system down if the grid goes down. And you're thinking, why is that? Well, it's a safety mechanism. If the grid is down, there's a good chance there's going to be utility workers out there on the line trying to repair whatever has gone bad. If your system is still producing electricity and you don't happen to use it all, you're going to send electricity out to that line. It can be a safety hazard for the utility worker. So that's why the system shuts down. So you may want to have batteries during an outage. Storm Uri, a few years back in Texas, wiped out huge swaths of Texas in terms of their grid. And a lot of Texans are moving towards having batteries now because of that. Next slide, please. So a battery, you're going to want a battery if you struggle with frequent outages, if you have critical loads at your organization that you cannot afford to have electricity down, you need to have it up 24/7, or if you just want to be prepared for disasters. So backup power, a battery makes sense on that. What doesn't make sense if you want to have money to get paid or to help have the grid compensate you for that electricity, because the compensation credits are not that much for the extra electricity you can send out to the grid, and the prices of batteries while they're coming down are still kind of expensive. So if you're asking yourself, do I want a battery, and you're asking strictly from financial perspective, then a battery doesn't make sense. If there are other reasons you want a battery, then it makes total sense. Just to let you know. Next slide, please. So some frequently asked questions. How long do systems last? Well, when people ask me that question, they're generally asking about the warranties. So there are three kinds of warranties on a system. One is a power production warranty, one is on the equipment, and one is on the labor. So on the labor, that's going to the labor that your installation company does, the work that they physically do on the system, that's going to vary. It could be for 5 years, it could be for 10 years, it could be for 20 years. It just depends on your installation company that you work with. So you want to ask that question and be very aware of what that is. The second warranty is on the parts themselves. The inverter, depending on the kind of inverter you get, could vary anywhere from 15 to 25 years. It depends if you want a microinverter or a string inverter. The warranties on the panels themselves and the modules themselves, again, are going to be in that 15 to 25 year range. The third warranty is a power production warranty. So this is how much power will those modules produce compared to how they were designed to produce in year one. And generally speaking, the warranties for this are going to last about 25 years. I've seen some last 30, but generally it's about 25 years. And the range for production of the warranty is anywhere from 80 to low 90 percentile. And what that means is, in year 25, let's say you have an 85% power production warranty on your module, your system. In year 25, or however long the warranty lasts, those modules are guaranteed to produce 85% of the power that they produced in year one, which I think is pretty good for a system to last that long and produce at that high level. Now, does that mean in year 26 they're going to just drop off a cliff and suddenly produce nothing? Of course not. It's going to slowly decrease over that. But you won't have a warranty past year 25. So the question of how long do systems last, if you're just talking warranty, that's one answer. If you're talking physically how long they will produce electricity, that's a different answer. I was at a farmer's market back in 2021, and a woman asked me if I knew of any companies that would repair a broken solar system. And I said, I gave her some recommendations, and I said, well, how old is your system? She goes, well, we installed it in 1979, and it had just broken that year. So, that was 40 years later. Now, I'm sure its production wasn't very high in year 40, but it was still going. So there's two answers to that question. Building insurance, generally speaking, your system will not increase your building insurance, but you want to check with your provider. First off, you want to let your insurance company know that you have the system so that if something happens to the building, you can get reimbursement for that, because it's a large investment. But the other reason you want to talk to them is to make sure that your insurance covers it. Generally speaking, we have insurance coverage up to a certain level. And most of us are going to have the value of our building is not going to press up against that limit on that level of insurance, whether it's $1 million, $5 million, 500,000, whatever it might be for the building. There's a chance that installing your solar will put it over that limit on your insurance. There's always that possibility. But so you want to communicate with your insurance company about that. But generally speaking, it's not going to push over, but but there's a possibility. How will solar affect my property value? It will not affect and to be honest with you, if your building is owned by a nonprofit, I'm not sure you have to worry about property taxes. You all would know that better than me. But if you're renting space, you're also not necessarily responsible for the taxes on the building or the resale of the building. But if you happen to own your building, it will not affect the tax burden. Again, I don't think you'll have to worry about that. Property value, though, it can increase your property value. I've seen some stats say by as much as 40%. I think that's a little high. What we tend to say as Solar United Neighbors is however much money you put into the system that's how much it will increase the value of your property. Now, if you go to sell the building, solar I think increases greatly the desirability or the sellability of the building, because the new owners are going to say, hey, look, I can produce free electricity. But yeah, so that's the effect it'll generally have on a property value. How do I monitor performance? When you purchase a system, it'll come with a software that will allow your phone or a computer to monitor the production of the system. And that's a known illness that afflicts new solar owners, is constantly checking their software, see how their panels are doing. Maintenance needs are minimal. You know, these systems are designed to put in and just leave alone and let go. Now, if you happen to live in an area, or have your building rather in an area where you might get a lot of soot on the panels or a lot of dust, you could always take a hose and kind of hose them off once a year, maybe once or twice a year. I know that some people buy special brushes online that they can kind of drag over them to clean them. I personally would not recommend that. The amount of production you will gain from that is probably not going to match the potential for damaging the panels if you have, like, put little micro scratches in them or something, if you happen to get a rock stuck in the brush or something by accident or whatever it might be. But again, washing them off with a hose is probably the most you'd want to do. It would be our recommendation. If you're in a historic district, oftentimes panels will work just fine in a historic district. The one limitation I've heard is not being visible from the street, so putting them on the back or a side of the building, or of the roof of the building that is not visible from the street. But certainly you want to contact the head of the leadership of your historic district and talk to them about what the process is for that. Next slide, please, Alex. So before we get to the next section, do we want to have are there any questions we want to deal with, Alex? I haven't seen anything in the chat box. Okay, well, we'll move forward because I don't see anything in the chat box, so that's great. So in terms of economics and financing, solar is a great business investment. The price of these systems have come down incredibly from the 1970s to today. As much as 73%, although we're seeing a slight uptick in the prices now compared to like last year or the year before, but pretty close to that mark is where panels are now compared to the 1970s. The federal tax increased from 26 to 30% now because of the Inflation Reduction Act, the federal law that sets the tax credit. So we're going to talk about that a little bit in a minute. But that tax credit, even though you don't pay the federal taxes as a nonprofit, will apply to you. There is small commercial solar costs are generally about 25% less per watt than residential, so it's a good value. And then of course the EASSI grant. Next slide, please. So the investment tax credit basics, the ITC. So on systems less than 1 megawatt, 1 megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. So you're going to be just fine being under that level in terms of the system. Is eligible for 30% tax credit. Adders, there are some adders that can be done to increase that tax credit. The federal government is still coming out with guidelines for that. If you happen to be in an energy community where you're where the transition from fossil fuel to a sustainable energy system is affecting your community, then there might be an adder there. If you're in a low-income area, there might be an adder there. By adder meaning increasing the amount of the tax credit. But those guidelines are still coming out. If you purchase a battery, you can still get the 30% tax credit if you just purchase a battery alone. Those tax credits are taken in the year that the system operates. So let's say you have your system installed in 23, but it doesn't get turned on until 24. Then 24 is the year that you would take the tax credit. So again, so when you file for that tax credit in 2025. Again, we're waiting on the federal guidelines for some of this. But the important thing to know for you all is direct pay is now possible for nonprofits. You may have heard this already, but I'll just reiterate it. You don't pay taxes, of course, but you can file for a 30% payout from the government, just like you received a tax credit as a nonprofit. And that's a great advantage now that wasn't there a year ago. Next slide, please. Again, this is just more of the information on the tax credit. They have that, well, the way it works now is there's a base ITC of 6%, and then the wage rate and apprentice requirements can increase that to 30%. Again, EASSI is going to help you with how to sort of figure that out for your business or for your organization. But just know that you are eligible for that 30% investment tax credit. And again, reiterating again, waiting on final guidance from the federal government. Next slide, please. So you can roll that credit over into the next year. In your case, that's more for people who basically pay taxes and get the credit, and that if they can't use the credit in 1 year. But you all, that really doesn't apply to you because you can apply for the full tax credit direct pay immediately. There are additional credits for energy efficiency and electrification investments. So if you decide to say put in a heat pump, electric heat pump into your building, there are tax credits that are available for that. And again, we're waiting on federal guidance for that in this year. Next slide, please. So the EASSI grant terms, solar 30% matching grant up to $30,000. So again, between the ITC, the payout, direct pay of the tax credit, plus the EASSI grant terms, you're looking at over half, potentially over half of the cost of a system being knocked off for you. And that's great. That's a huge advantage in installing a system. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about some examples. Let's say you got a 39.9 kilowatt array on your roof of your building. And again, these are examples. Please don't take these as literal because your situation is going to vary. But the cost for that, initial cost for that might be close to $80,000. Well, you take almost $24,000 off from the EASSI grant as well as the federal tax credit. Now you've knocked down the investment down to almost $30,000, and you can see a break even of 7 years. You'll have paid off the cost of that. You've saved enough electricity to have paid off the cost of that net investment of $31,726. If you think about that, 7 years, you paid it off. That means, and you've got guaranteed production for the next 18 years. You have 18 years of free electricity, and think about the amount of money you're going to save over that amount of time. It's pretty impressive. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn this back over to Alex, who's going to talk about the EASSI program. But before I do, if there's any questions anybody has about the sections we just went through, I'd be happy to entertain those. Okay, well, Alex,
I do.
Oh, yeah.
I raised the hand, probably didn't see me.
Oh, sorry.
So hi, thank you for that great information. I'm a little confused with the math here in terms that we are nonprofit. So obviously we do not pay taxes. How that federal tax credit works in our case.
Sure. What happens is, let's can we go back a slide, Alex? So looking at this, you're paying close to $80,000 for a system in this example, okay? So if you were to purchase that system and have it installed, at the time when everybody else is filing their income taxes, of course, you don't have to do that, but at that time, so the following year between January 1 and April 15, you would be eligible to file for a direct pay from the federal government equal to the tax credit you would have been eligible for, 30%, if you had been paying taxes. So you would file, and I don't know what the form is because I haven't had to do it yet, but there is a form that you can file for that. The federal government may not even have it yet because it's just, this is the first year it's possible. And you would, if you had your system installed this year, you wouldn't file for this until the beginning of 2024. So I don't even know if that form exists yet, but it will be there at the beginning of next year. Mm-hmm. You would just complete that form, submit it, and then they would cut a check for you for the equivalent of that 30% of that system. Mm-hmm. Does that help?
Yeah, it does help a lot. Yeah, I guess so. That's never happened before.
Yeah, this is going to be a new experience for all because, again, this is the first time they've done direct pay on this tax credit. Up to this point, there was a way for nonprofits to take advantage of the 30%, but it was this convoluted system involved a third party, and yeah. But you don't have to worry about that anymore. It's a direct pay. Any other questions?
One more. When you were talking about that battery system,
Sure.
an automatic shut off. So that battery system is basically a storage of that extra energy that is produced. Because in our case, we have to have electricity. So if there is a power outage, that would be our backup instead of the generators. Yes. Correct. So it's just from the perspective of this savings when you describe different options. That storage, it just adds the cost of the hardware versus an installation versus any other cost, right? Is that correct? Any other time that will work in our advantage to get that energy credit or going back to the system and get a credit from energy provider. But the only consideration would be the extra cost of the equipment and the installation. Is that correct?
Yes. So, if you think about the system going through, the panels produce electricity and they send it to the inverter. If you had a battery, depending on how your system is set up, it could be installed before or after the inverter, but that electricity would go to that battery. Probably before the inverter, stored as DC electricity. It would go to that battery and it would be stored there. And this would be electricity that you're not using. This would be electricity that you would otherwise send out to the grid. So the cost of installation, the cost of the equipment is the only thing that you would add to this example on the screen. When the electricity is sent out to the grid now, for systems installed now, the credit is only it's wholesale value plus a small percentage, and so it's called the excessive distributed generation rate, the EDG rate, and it's much less than the electricity the rate you pay for electricity coming into your building. So the electricity you send out gets credited at a much lower rate than the electricity you receive from the grid. So if you want to maximize as much consumption of your electricity as you can because electricity you use takes the place of the high price retail electricity you buy from the grid. And so if you store electricity in a battery, that's going to replace that high electricity that you pay for from the utility. However, the cost of the battery does not offset from a financial standpoint the electricity savings you get from not purchasing that high-rated retail electricity. Does that help? I'm not sure I'm addressing your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna move forward here, and we'll have hopefully we'll have a little bit more time for questions. I am experiencing some internet connectivity issues, so please let me know if you're having some trouble hearing me. I've turned my camera on again, but could turn it off if I'm having some challenges with the bandwidth. So wanted to give you an overview of how solar works with the EASSI program. So these are the steps through the EASSI program when it comes to going for solar. So you have your energy assessment report. We collect and compare quotes. You select your installer, then you decide on financing. And so let's go through those steps. So this is a screenshot of an example from an assessment where we say, hey, you might be a good candidate for solar. Here's our recommendation. And then going on to step 2, collecting and comparing quotes. So we can help facilitate the collecting and comparing quotes from different solar installers, and there's several solar installers within our area and region, and so we can help you collect those and digest and dissect and kind of compare and contrast those quotes. So this is an example of a quote from a local installer here. And so this is looking at some things to highlight. So this is the total cost of the system. This is the break-even point. So often there's these graphs of, okay, this is when you're in the negative, and at this point in the year of your ownership of your system, this is when you start to break even, and now you're producing electricity basically for free, because the electricity at this break-even point is when you basically produce enough electricity to pay for the cost of that total system. And then this is just another thing to call out here is the dollars per watt. And so this is a good metric to compare amongst other quotes. And so this is saying, this is sort of a measure of cost effectiveness of what's the dollar per watt of this system compared to this other quote. And so this gives you a nice comparison to see how cost effective it is, how much solar you're able to produce per dollar. And these are metrics that we can help break down for you as well. So this is another way that quotes might be presented. So this is the energy offset. So this is how much energy is offset through solar. And then this is another way that they may highlight, just putting down a year of their estimate for when your system would break even. And then, similar way that they might present quotes are these graphs. And again, this is looking at pre-solar and post-solar. And so you can kind of see what your solar production would look like, and what your bills and would look like given that solar installation. And again, this is another way that quotes might present items similarly, breaking down the payback period. And so they might present it here. And then again, a chart that shows when you start to break even. I also wanted to give a quick aside on quotes in the system size. So first we've talked about, okay, you get your assessment, you review quotes, you compare them. And so one thing I wanted to talk about just as a quick aside here is maximizing your solar energy benefits in the post-net metering environment. So Dan touched a little bit on post-net or net metering, I should say. And net metering ended June 30th, 2022. And so this is when the utility provided essentially one-to-one credit for excess electricity that you've produced, and they put that credit on your electric bill. And so right now we're in the post-net metering environment, and so that means that the utility provides a significantly less credit from excess electricity. And so, if you have excess electricity, you will want to right size your system so that you can sort of minimize that amount of excess electricity. That way, you're not overproducing, and you're not essentially giving for free access electricity to the utility, because you're basically you're creating a system and also producing electricity that you'd be giving at a significant discount. So it's something that you're not necessarily fully benefiting from. However, despite this net metering, post-net metering environment, with the EASSI incentives, in addition to the federal incentives that are available, it still makes a lot of good financial sense to go solar. And so wanted to also present some slides here about how that looks like. So this is an example of an initial quote where the blue is the production of solar and the orange is the consumption of this particular building. And so these arrows represent the excess of between how much you consume and how much you produce. And so with the right sizing of your solar system, what you want to do is you want to have a solar system that closely aligns with your consumption, so that you're sort of like optimizing your system and fully benefiting from all that solar system is producing. And so this is an updated quote where we've right-sized the system, and a lot of the production is more closely following the consumption, especially during the peak moments here in the summer where there's a higher demand. And so, just as this graphic shows, solar production more closely follows consumption, so it's minimizing excess electricity that would be significantly discounted from the utility. And as Dan has talked about as well, you could utilize batteries to store excess energy. And again, you'll have to compare that with what your needs are, and then there's also, you know, weighing that with the costs of doing a system with a battery. Yeah, the battery system costs are coming down, but they are still costly, and so that's something that you'll want to chat with your installer about, and we're also here to help chat through different options to see if a battery is a right fit for your building. So that's the end of my side there. Just wanted to talk a little bit about how when you're looking at quotes, perhaps revisiting those quotes, thinking about how you can have a quote that more closely aligns with your energy consumption. And so just going through these easy steps here. So just kind of following back up onto this step number 2, collecting and comparing quotes. And so we've kind of talked about these sort of these main metrics here: upfront costs, the break-even point, the dollars per watt. There might be some other things or criteria that are of interest to you when it comes to solar. So maybe the percent offset, maybe you're looking at you want a more coverage for a warranty. Maybe you want it made locally or made in America or made or installed through a union, or maybe there's certain aesthetics you're looking for. Maybe if you have solar, you want a community facing kiosk or dashboard so you can highlight your project, and that's actually something that's covered through the EASSI grant this year. And then this is actually a list of installers that you can look at through the MACOG website, which is the Michiana Council of Governments. And this is a list that we can help connect you with if you're wanting to look at different installers to collect quotes. And then this is just another example of like looking at different criteria here. So this NABCEP certification is something that folks often look for, because this is something that says they are trained in installing and designing and managing a solar system. There's some other criteria here as well. And then this is looking at an example of some of the criteria we helped break down for a particular organization last year, looking at different elements of a quote and seeing how those compare and contrast with different solar installers. So just calling some of those out: the system size, the type of panel, the warranty, how soon can they install, the mounting approach. So there might be a different way to install those particular panels. So those are all different things to keep into account. So just to review these again. So, you know, most of the folks on the call have received their assessment report. The next process for going solar would be collecting and comparing quotes, and those are things that we could help you with, and then deciding on an installer, and then deciding on financing. And so just to circle back on the financing piece, so the city, there's city and federal incentives. The city being the EASSI program provides a 30% matching grant. The federal incentive being that 30% direct payment, and we're still waiting to get the finalized guidance from the IRS in terms of what that looks like for nonprofits, and we're keeping a close eye on that. As soon as that information's out, we'll definitely let folks know about it. And then there might be some additional options. So maybe you need some additional financing. You might have a preferred lender. There's other low interest financing options that are through IFF, who's also one of our partners to the EASSI program. There's several clean energy credit unions. One example is the Hoosier Hills Credit Union. There's Collective Sun. So these are just some examples of different financing options that are available that can help fill any financing gaps. And in a lot of cases, when you take out a loan like this, as we've kind of talked about the benefits of solar, sometimes it makes sense to, take out a loan knowing that in a couple of years that system will pay for itself. I definitely highly encourage you to reach out to Sam, who's of CDFI Friendly South Bend, who's also a partner in the EASSI program, to help explore options, and he can help connect you with folks in the financing space to think through the best way for you to finance a solar project or an energy efficiency project. And you can always reach out to me, and I can answer questions or connect you to the best point of contact. Just want to highlight some easy examples from last year. So this is La Casa And I'll just call out some elements of each, some important things to note from each of these projects. So solar rooftop project, flat roof. This particular project was aiming towards covering the majority of their electricity needs. They also went with a local solar manufacturer, Crossroads Solar, to install their panels. Crossroads Solar is a local solar manufacturer that's here in South Bend. And they have sort of a social mission behind it, and that was something of importance to La Casa, as well as the Beacon Resource Center, which is in one of the following slides here. This is a solar install through the Near Northwest neighborhood for their community center, and this offsets roughly about 100% of their electricity needs specifically for the community center. So in the past, a few years back, they had this section of the solar installed, and this is about 5 or 8 kilowatts, I believe it was. And so through the EASSI program, they were able to expand the amount of solar that they added to the rooftop to cover most of their community centered electricity needs. And so now in total, it's about a 15 kilowatt system. This is another example, the clubhouse of St. Joseph County. So here they have a different type of roofing material here. It's a roof at an angle, a metal type of roofing. And so they, different mounting approach, but definitely something that, as Dan has talked about, is an option. And then this is the Beacon Resource Center. Again, a different type of install where you have 2 types of you have a mounting that's on both ends of this sort of angled rooftop. So just trying to put this into context here, there's different considerations to keep in mind for solar. So definitely cost is, of course, top of mind, the size of your system. So looking at right sizing your system is likely the best way to go to maximize your investment. And there might be some other considerations as well, whether that's made locally, there's et cetera. There's different types of criteria, and so those are things that we can help break down for you. As I showed in some of those tables that help try to tease out some of those like fine details that are in all of those solar quotes. And then there's just to provide some context in terms of the timing for solar, and so. There's different timelines that are at play for solar. So there's the installer's timeline. So being able to get on their timeline in terms of when they're able to install their solar project through a particular installer. So getting on their schedule of projects. And then there's the timeline for the state and the city. So there's some permits that need to be approved before a solar installer can install those. And they'll work through those permits as part of their work, but just something to keep in mind as well. And then finally, there's a timeline of working with the utility where they will need to review their electrical. They might need to do a scheduled shutoff temporarily as part of making sure that all the connections are right and that they provided permission for you to connect to the grid. So those are just different timelines to keep in mind, and so that you have sort of those expectations in place in terms of how long it might take to install something for solar. Those are all the questions I have. I'll just run through real quick because we are running short of time. Important dates, the week of May 1st is our review of the assessment report. So if folks haven't signed up just yet, be sure to go to this link here, abazon-3/3HR here. Go to this link, make sure to sign up and schedule a meeting with us. I will continue to provide reminders on that. Definitely want to make sure you have an opportunity to review that report with us in the week of May 1st. So yeah, invite your stakeholders, decision makers, your board members to that meeting. We do have a financing webinar, which is next Thursday, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Definitely check that out. We're hoping that these webinars help and supplement what the energy assessment report is providing. And so just a couple of days ago, we talked about electric rebates and incentives that are available. We've chatted about solar We have a financing webinar coming up, and we hope all these things help provide it and put into perspective how you can pursue a project, take advantage of different incentives that are available, and be able to finance those projects. Wanted to give a quick pitch to solar for folks that might know of a business within South Bend. So we do have a program for businesses for solar. It's called the Vibrant Places program. Similar matching type of grant program, not as a large of a percentage in terms of matching grant that the EASSI program provides. But if you do know any board members within your network who are part of a business or who own a business, highly encourage them to apply to the Vibrant Places program. They could receive up to 55%, almost half of their total costs off with the city incentive in addition to the federal incentive that is out there. And similarly, we also provide webinars for them to learn about if solar is a good fit for them. We also provide a study for them to see if what the feasibility looks like for them in terms of going solar. And so if you know any businesses, have them apply at southbendin.gov/vibrantplaces. Couple more slides here. So we have Earth Month. So feel free to go to our Earth Month page if you're looking for activities, and if you have an Earth Month activity, you can also contact us and we can put it here on our calendar. And with that, I know we're a little bit over time. Dan, if you're able to stick around for a minute or two, we can answer any additional questions. All right, Dorada, any questions, or Patrick or Shelly? Any additional questions on battery storage for?
So, quick question then on battery. How expensive are those? Like, can you give me a range? I know everything is specific to the cost, but range.
I can't give you a range because those prices have fluctuated a little bit, and I haven't looked at them in a year or so. But I do know a year or two ago somebody purchased a battery that was in the $10,000 to $15,000 range. But I can't remember if that was one battery or two. So I'm sorry, that's the best I can do for you right now.
Yeah, and Dorado, we can also get a quote for those batteries as part of a solar install, and typically the solar installers are familiar with battery install, and so that's something we can look into, so you can get a sense of what those battery costs are looking like.
With our location and where we are, there's lots of dust. Like I don't know if you remember that we do not. My joke about you can take as much as you want. We don't charge for it because it's really dusty. We have arena and pastures and paddocks. So I wonder if that makes sense for us to dive into it, or would it be counterproductive? My car is like, you can ride on it every single day, even though I wash it. So, so that's another thing I was wondering.
So do I understand you correctly that you're wondering if the system is worth it because it would get dust covered so much? Is that your question?
Yes. Unless we do those not power washing, hosing off, because it's so dusty here, like more than average.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, is that a limitation? I never thought about it. I thought, it's in a way it could be implemented, but if I think about the amount of dust I bring home every single day, it's significant. So. Yeah.
So I think that's a question that you would probably want to ask your installer, because it would depend on the efficiency of the panels that you purchase, the type. I still got to believe that because if you think back to the map that we showed where the most solar resources are in the Southwest US, but that's also the driest and the dustiest, right? So they're going to get, covered with dust and such down there, and yet that's a great place for solar. So I got to believe that's not going to be something that they should keep you from doing it in and of itself. But, that'd be a question for your installer to be able to sort of figure that out.
Okay. I guess I will have to have somebody who does that and just reevaluate the feasibility of the project for us.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of businesses and a lot of individuals, homeowners do, is they get the design, they get the specifics to their particular situation, and then they make a decision based on that. That's pretty common.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I see Shelley has a question here. What happens when the panels are fully charged? Do they just stop collecting, or is there a discharge of energy somehow? The panels themselves don't get charged. They just produce electricity and send it out. So the question becomes, what happens to that electricity? Where does it go? So first it's going to go to your home, or your business rather, to use. And then if you have a battery, it'll go to the battery. If you don't have a battery, or if you happen to have a battery that's fully charged, then it's going to send it out to the grid, and you'll get reimbursed at a much lower rate for your electricity, that EDG rate, instantly measured, versus what you have to spend on the retail rate. But that in a sense, that's the discharge of energy, is that the excess energy goes out to the grid. Does that help, Shelley? Well, I'll watch the chat box, but I hope it does.
The question I had was just that, so with the battery systems, would those be considered more of kind of like an emergency backup, or would those be designed to like kick in at night and chip on energy, or how would those systems kind of function?
Those systems are designed to function to discharge electricity whenever your load, the amount of electricity you're using, exceeds the amount of electricity that your panels produce. So it could be if you have an organization that uses a lot of electricity during the day, and it happens to be a really cloudy day, so you're not producing as much as you normally do, and you need some battery discharge, the batteries will do that. Certainly at night they will do that. So they're designed to be used whenever your load exceeds your production of your panels.
And then I guess a follow-up question, and it may be too specific to our specific purpose. We're a museum, and so we have significant energy needs just to keep the climate controlled all the time. So our estimate when we got it back in the package was a solar panel project could potentially cover about 1/5 of our energy use, something in that range at maximum. Would a battery system still be able to supplement systems? Because one of the attractive things is we don't actually have a generator system at the museum, which is kind of surprising. And so if it could function in that emergency backup role, but in that situation, would the batteries theoretically, I'm sure it's, answer's always money, but would it be able to have enough battery capacity to function in a role like that, or would it just be more supplementing when the solar's low?
Well, I guess I'm not quite sure I quite understand your question. I'm sorry, Patrick.
I guess so one of the things that we've always talked about at the museum is adding a generator for emergencies when the power grid goes down.
Sure.
We don't have anything functionally in that role, and so the question, would a battery, if our solar system is only projected to produce 1/5 of our energy consumption in the average month, would a battery system be able to function as a backup generator, or would that not have enough energy in it? If the whole rest of the grid was down.
Sure, that's okay. Now I get it. Well, the truth is I don't know, because it depends on your level of usages. So, for example, if it's producing 20% of your overall usage, are there moments during the day when you project that it's going to produce more than you need at that particular moment?
Okay.
Because that's when the battery stores it. So my guess is 20% of your usage is probably not going to charge the battery a whole lot, but please don't take that as a definitive answer, because that's really going to depend on your situation, and your installer can help you with that. What depending on your budget, what a battery would do in your situation would allow you to increase the percentage of your usage that you're covering with your panels. Because let's say you doubled, and not that you had the budget to do this, but let's just say you doubled your panels to where it covered 40% of your usage. Well, the odds of you having moments where you send excess electricity out to the grid just increased. But if you have a battery, then that takes care of that, because that'll take that excess electricity.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe one other question, maybe this is helpful with the storage for solar. So if the power goes out and you have a battery system, your solar panels, are they still functioning, and can they feed that to your battery to power parts of the building? Maybe that helps with like the generator backup type of question.
Yeah, if you have a system with a battery backup and the power goes down on the grid, those panels will still operate. They will still send, they'll do what they call island. They'll become an island from the grid. And so you can't send any electricity out to the grid at that point, or receive electricity from the grid at that point. And then the battery, your building will still take electricity from the panels if they're producing. But if they're not producing, say at night, but you're still island off because the grid is still down, then they will take electricity from the batteries. Does that answer your question, Alex?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Yeah, because I think that's sort of like the purpose of like if you have a solar system that can function as a generator, does that work for a building? And so I think you answered my question.
Yeah.
I think that might be helpful for folks on the call here.
And I think another thing is, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but because the systems are going to last 25, 30 years in terms of producing, because with their warranty, what some organizations and what some homeowners have done is they've purchased an inverter and a setup that would allow them to install batteries later, so that if the prices come down enough on batteries, or the price of electricity goes up enough that it starts to make economic sense, and they have some funds later, they can install a battery relatively easily. So even if you don't have the money for it now, but you think you might want one down the road, I would recommend that you talk to your installer about making sure your system is battery ready.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. Other questions? Dorota, Patrick, Shelley?
I don't have any other questions.
No, thank you. I had to chuckle. It's like, am I that student that always has their hand up?
That's okay. That's what these webinars are for. And if you have more questions afterwards, we're always here to answer those questions or get those questions answered for you. And yeah, we want to make sure you have a successful EASSI project, if that's solar energy efficiency. And yeah, I mean, if you're kind of on the fence on solar, we can help you collect some quotes just to see what those look like, and we can go from there. And it's always good to have some of those quotes in hand, and maybe you're thinking about solar in the long run, and so that's something you can reference to say, okay, it's about, this is what a system might look like here in the future if you're not ready to go with solar this year, for example, with EASSI. But of course, we want to make sure, no matter if you go solar or solar in the future, that for the EASSI program this year, you go with a project that makes sense for you and that's successful, and that it helps you save energy.
So along those lines, because we had multiple points, right? All good, but we are not able to tackle everything, of course. Would that opportunity, you think, be extended for the next year or couple next years, since there is multiple things that we could benefit off of? Or is it two of the... Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's a great question. And so this is the second year of the EASSI program, and so we're hopeful that the program will be renewed in a future year, but that's something that has to be decided with every budgeting process that the city has, and if that EASSI program is renewed, we hope it will have something similar that we have like this year, where we have a mix of new and returning organizations. The program might change in terms of the incentives or how many organizations we can accept. So those are always things that might be in flex, and that might be different. But yeah, that is something that we hope will be renewed for next year, is a EASSI 3.0.
And Dan, one more question to you. I don't know if, because I've been kind of interested in those solar solutions, and I don't recall the company's name, but I watched the installation and the design of the solar battery that looks like a flower. It's on a pole, and it is exactly like a flower, and it follows the sun, direction of the sun, turns around, and it actually, when it doesn't work, it folds, and on the back of those panels, there are brushes that wipe the dust. Have you seen those before?
I've seen pictures of them. Yeah. The thing about those, and there's a lot of really cool solar designs out there, but when you start to put in moving parts and you start to look at the increased cost of that versus the increased production from, like, say, something following the sun, the payoff is not there. You pay more for the further design and the moving parts than you get in the production from the panels, from following the sun. From a strictly economic standpoint, you'd be better off buying one flower wouldn't be as good as 2 stationary panels. So you're better off increasing the size of your just ordinary system, throw a few more panels up on the roof, versus buying something like that. Now, if your consideration is aesthetics, that's a different question, and that only you can answer, whether you want to spend the extra money for it.
No, that wasn't that much aesthetic as the fact of following the sun, and the fact that I've learned that our major roof side that I consider the best south-facing huge area is not designed. It was built in the past, and that a capacity for the weight bearing is not there. Like, we couldn't utilize it, so I was looking for alternatives, basically.
Sure. And I don't know if you've got east or west facing roofs, but
we do have east and west facing roofs. That I'm not sure about the capacity, because I didn't know. You just told me something new, that those could be considered as well.
Yeah, that's what I would recommend, is to look at that, because again, you can do just fine with those roofs.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, I think we're gonna wrap up the webinar. I will send a recording out, and yeah, if there's any additional questions on solar, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll get those questions answered. Thank you all for attending, and thank you, Dan, for another great presentation from that you've so kindly provided to us this year and last year, and hopefully we'll have another year of another great Solar 101 session.
All right, y'all take care.
All right, thank you. Bye.